Beneath the pale gray sky of an early autumn morning, a thin mist wrapped around the courtyard of Brookside Elementary, like a wool scarf around a place so peaceful it seemed frozen in time. The main door eased open. The click of the nurse's heels echoed down the hallway. The scratch of chalk on a distant blackboard ticked softly, and the rumble of a familiar cleaning cart came from the service wing in back, together weaving the ordinary tapestry of a suburban Indiana school. Into this scene stepped a new figure, Officer Leah Monroe in a crisp navy uniform, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail, eyes calm but alert. Walking beside her was Axel, a sable-colored German Shepherd K9, whose coat shimmered like freshly polished mahogany in the soft light. Axel's movement was so measured, so precise, that he seemed to vanish into the background, until you looked closely and saw the twitch of a muscle at his shoulder, a slight flick of the tail or ears, always scanning, always receiving. Axel wasn't the kind of dog who bounced around excitedly on walks. He moved quietly, deliberately, as if each step was calculated. For Axel, every hallway wasn't a novelty. It was a responsibility. His job was to ensure that every child in this school was safe. Brookside was a temporary post as part of the county's Safe Schools program, a detail Leah considered easier than raids or rescues. But from the moment Axel stepped onto the linoleum floor of the main hallway, something shifted. He was no longer himself. No tail wagging, no social sniffing, no sitting to observe. Instead, his body tensed, ears upright, eyes sweeping the space as if entering an area that hadn't yet been cleared. Leah quietly adjusted his leash. She knew her four-legged partner well, a dog that never overreacted, never growled without reason, and had never given a false alert. But here, in a grade school among lunchboxes, crayon drawings, and the chatter of children, she couldn't imagine what could be setting him off. And then it happened. As the pair passed a side hallway leading to the nurse's office, Axel stopped cold. The leash jerked taut in Leah's hand. No barking, no panic, just a low, quiet, unmistakable growl deep in his throat, like an ancient sound carried from a darker place. His eyes were fixed on a pale blue door with a wooden sign, Custodian, Private. It was the supply room of Mrs. Clarissa Bennett, the African-American janitor with a gentle presence, gray hair in a tidy bun, and a habit of wearing plum-colored cardigans. She was known for her warm smile, always handing out peppermint candies to scraped-knee kids and reminiscing about school days down south, with a voice full of nostalgia. Leah frowned, glanced at the door, then down at Axel. "What is it, buddy?" she murmured, tightening the leash slightly. Axel, of course, didn't answer, but the way he held his breath and tilted his head slightly suggested he was taking in something imperceptible to human senses. A sound, a scent, maybe even a memory buried from a past encounter. "Probably bleach," Leah whispered to herself. She knew canines were often triggered by strong chemical odors, cleaners, glues, gasoline. But this growl, it wasn't like his usual chemical alerts. It was deeper, like a warning being held back. She was about to lead him away when the nearby door creaked open. Mrs. Clarissa stepped out with a mop bucket full of supplies. Her face lit up as always, but just for a fleeting second, her eyes froze when she saw Axel growling. "Oh, looks like your friend here doesn't like bleach, huh?" she said with a shaky chuckle. Leah returned a polite smile. "Maybe. He's sensitive to smells." Axel had stopped growling, but his eyes never left the door behind Mrs. Clarissa. Leah thanked her and moved on. But something didn't sit right. She couldn't say what it was, only that Axel never stopped for nothing. And he had never growled like that, so soft, so deliberate, unless something was truly wrong. She logged it in her end-of-day report. Just one short line. Axel responded at the custodian storage area. Recommend continued observation. As they continued down the hallway, Axel didn't wag his tail. He merely glanced back one last time. Not to check, but as if to leave behind a message, as if something was hidden behind that old wooden door. And that first growl had just begun to unearth a secret darker than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, as the first school bell rang through the crisp air and the sun crested the line of maple trees out front, Leah and Axel again walked the long hallway toward the nurse's office. And just like a compass needle drawn by an unseen force, Axel stopped once more before the pale blue door marked Custodian. Private. He didn't growl this time, just tilted his head, ears alert, eyes fixed, as if trying to see through the thick wood to something beyond name or imagination. Leah stood still beside him, one hand on the leash, eyes flicking toward the hallway's end, where Mrs. Clarissa Bennet was casually pushing her silver-gray cleaning cart, the rubber wheels making that familiar soft squeak on the tile floor. That sound, to everyone at Brookside, was like a wind chime on a porch. Comforting, ever-present. Clarissa always showed up for school events, set up folding chairs for PTA meetings, and joked with kids that she could see everything through her magic mop. She had wiped up ink spills, changed light bulbs, and even listened to a second grader cry about a lost library card. To staff and parents alike, she was the definition of dependable, a woman trusted enough to be given the school's emergency keys. But Axel, the dog who had never read a resume, never heard an introduction and wasn't swayed by emotions or reputations, seemed to sense something completely different. Leah began noticing a pattern. Every time the sound of the cartwheels neared that door, Axel would raise his head, before the sound even reached them. It wasn't a reaction. It was anticipation. On the third day, when Clarissa paused across from the second-grade classroom to mop, Axel pulled Leah toward her. Not with a sudden jerk, but with firm, deliberate steps, nose low, sweeping the floor. Leah crouched beside him, hand tightening slightly on the leash. "What is it, buddy?" she whispered. Axel didn't reply, but the way he inhaled deeply, then gave that same quiet growl, like the very air around them disturbed him, made Leah shiver. At that moment, Clarissa turned, waved, and smiled at Leah, her eyes darting quickly to Axel. "Guess your little guy still hasn't warmed up to me," she said, voice light, but her shoulders visibly stiffened for a beat. Leah nodded and smiled faintly. "He's more sensitive than most, especially to strange smells or strange energy." She added the last phrase vaguely, but Clarissa's eyes twitched just for a split second, almost unnoticeable. As soon as Clarissa rolled her cart away, Axel moved to the custodian room door again. He sat, not like a dog waiting for a treat, but like a soldier guarding a gate he believed held something dark behind it. Leah gently touched his neck. "We'll come back. I won't let it slide." That night, when Leah opened her laptop to file her routine report, she wrote a long section on Axel's behavior. She didn't dramatize it. She simply described what she had seen, how Axel reacted only to one area, only to one person, and how it was happening more often. She concluded her internal note. "Axel has never shown this behavior toward any staff member in 2 years of service. No barking, no aggression, but unmistakably defensive. The response indicates a sensory trigger beyond visual identification. Recommend area review." She didn't submit the report, not because of doubt, but because she wanted to be sure. Axel, on the other hand, seemed certain already. He was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to what he had sensed from that very first growl. And Leah, though a seasoned officer familiar with countless cases, was starting to feel a strange intuition creeping in. Part experience. But mostly, it came from the eyes of her companion. Eyes that had never lied. Just as Leah had sensed, Axel didn't stop at one reaction. He didn't retreat, didn't get distracted, didn't shift focus like most dogs might once a threat faded. On the contrary, each passing day made his behavior clearer and more undeniable. The second time happened on a Wednesday morning. The school was holding its routine health checkup for students. Leah stood near the nurse's office with Axel as lines of children waited their turn. The hallway buzzed with laughter, chatter, and a faint mix of fresh paper and hand sanitizer. But the moment Clarissa pushed her cleaning cart past them, Axel spun around. He pulled against the leash, moving against the flow of students, his gaze locked on that same familiar door. A low growl came again. Still soft, still composed, but this time Leah, who knew every subtle shade of her partner's sounds, heard something new, a note of urgency, as if Axel were saying, "Why haven't you seen it yet?" Leah signaled him to sit, her hand gently stroking his back. "I see you, buddy," she whispered. "I promise, I see it." The next day, the third growl came, not as a warning but as confirmation. A class had ended early, and Leah took Axel on their usual perimeter check. But as they turned into the eastern wing, where the custodian's room sat beside the nurse's office, Axel halted, frozen like a statue. His ears pricked, his nose twitched, and then the growl rolled out, slow, deep, firm, like an ancestral drumbeat of instinct. Leah felt the leash tighten, not from aggression, but from sheer, unmoving focus. This wasn't a reaction. It was a stance, the kind only canines with the highest level of training could hold. No panic, no barking, just unwavering attention to a threat he couldn't explain in words. This time, Leah didn't let it slide. Once the students had settled into class, she brought Axel into the nurse's office. Emily Torres, the school nurse, was organizing medical supplies. She wore her usual silver heart pendant and a light floral perfume. A former pediatric nurse, Emily had joined the school system believing she could prevent harm before it ever left a scar. "Emily," Leah began, her voice light as if chatting about lunch plans. "My dog, Axel, seems fixated on the room across the hall. That's Clarissa's supply closet, right?" Emily turned, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "Yeah, it is," she said, returning to stack a box of bandages. A pause hung between them until Leah took a step closer and lowered her voice. "Have you ever felt anything strange around that area?" Emily's hands froze. After a quiet breath, she replied, without looking up, "Sometimes I smell something weird, like rusted metal or spoiled food, but I thought it was just from her cart. And a few times, I heard shuffling, but when I opened the door, no one was there. I don't know if anything's wrong. It just always feels like someone's been standing there, even when no one is." Leah didn't move. Axel, still seated at her feet, shivered. Not from cold, but as if something deep inside him had just been confirmed. "That feeling," Leah asked softly, "does it make you want to open the door?" Emily shook her head, finally meeting Leah's eyes. "It makes me want to stay away." Leah thanked her and stepped out with Axel by her side. No more words were needed. But as they passed the familiar door again, Axel stopped for the fourth time. No growl, just sat, eyes fixed on the wood, like a sentinel guarding something unseen. And this time, Leah didn't chalk it up to coincidence. She placed a hand on his head, speaking as if making a vow. "We'll come back, and next time I won't just listen." After that, Leah no longer passed the custodian's door with the same ease. Every time Axel stopped, always in the same spot, like he'd never left, something stirred inside her. A feeling hard to name, like walking across thin ice, unsure whether the surface could hold. Axel no longer growled. He didn't need to. Every time they passed, he paused, turned his head toward Leah, and looked at her. Deep brown eyes, calm, weighty, saying, "I've signaled. Now it's your turn." And then it happened. Sudden, sharp, without warning. But in hindsight, it had been building all along, from the very first growl. It was a Thursday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming the tiled hallway. The students were in the cafeteria, laughter and the clatter of lunchboxes echoing like the rhythm of a peaceful day. Leah was chatting with Emily near the nurse's office. Axel lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, ears tilted attentively, as always. Without a sound, Axel shot up. No warning growl, no bark, just a lightning-quick movement as he launched toward the custodian's door. The leash snapped taut, yanking Leah forward. Axel didn't bark or growl, just charged to the pale blue door, claws sliding across the tile, body stiff, back legs braced, head low, nose to the floor as if tracing an invisible breath. And then, he growled. But not like before. This sound was something Leah had never heard from him in 2 years. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't a reaction. It was ruptured, like the first fracture in a wall too long painted over with the words, "Safe School." Leah stepped back, gripping the leash, eyes scanning the door. And that's when she saw it. A silver padlock. Shiny. New. One that hadn't been there the day before. Not a built-in lock. An external one, like those used on storage sheds or rooms that held something valuable. At that moment, Clarissa Bennett appeared from the end of the hall. She walked quickly, rag in hand, her face carrying its usual smile, but her jaw clenched like a mask beginning to crack. "Oh my, what's got into you, little guy?" she said, voice pitched too high, eyes flicking to Leah, then the lock. "Dogs get real jumpy around strong bleach. My old lab used to leap up every time I cleaned with Clorox." Leah said nothing. She stepped closer to the door, eyes on the padlock, then turned, not to Clarissa, but to Axel. The dog sat, no growl, no tension, just stillness, as if his part was done. He had pointed. Now the rest was up to the humans. Leah turned to Clarissa, voice even. "You wouldn't mind if I checked inside, would you? Just want to rule out any odd chemicals? Some kids have asthma or allergies." Clarissa smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't follow. "Oh, I was just about to grab my mop. There's a spill in the boys' bathroom. If you give me 5 minutes." But Leah didn't wait, because at that moment, everything had snapped into place. The growls, the lock, Axel's eyes, Emily's quiet unease. It all formed a chilling silence that said more than words. She turned, pulled out her radio, and said quietly, "Requesting response team. Need assistance at storage room near nurse's office. Lockdown area A immediately." Clarissa went silent. She understood. And in that fleeting moment, Leah saw something in her eyes. Not surprise, but recognition. Like she had always known this day might come, and prayed it never would. Axel sat beside Leah, head slightly tilted, no longer tense, just watching the door, where pale blue paint was peeling, revealing something grayer underneath. The crack had appeared, not just in the padlock, not just in the old wooden door, but in the illusion of safety that wrapped this school. And Axel, with all his quiet, steady loyalty, had been the first to strike the wall, the first to make it tremble, and now, finally, to make it fall. School doors were supposed to open and close in rhythm with class hours. That's what Leah Monroe had always believed, until the day they started losing someone. That afternoon, as golden sunlight slowly spilled across the tiled hallways, Leah realized she was facing something irreversible. Clarissa Bennett, the woman the whole school had trusted, had vanished. It all happened within 5 minutes. Leah remembered it clearly. She had just finished the call requesting backup, when, on instinct, she rushed to the rear yard, partly out of training, partly because of that strange intuition she'd learned to trust ever since working with Axel. But when she got there, the scene was eerily calm. No figure in sight. No sounds of rushing footsteps. No signs of panic. Just a metal service door behind the kitchen, left ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. Like the final sound of something slipping away in silence. Minutes later, when the school office pulled up the camera footage, everything snapped into chilling focus. The screen showed Clarissa pushing her usual cleaning cart, the cloth draped over the top just as it always was. But this time, Leah looked closer, deeper. Beneath that cloth wasn't just a mop and bucket. There was something large, oddly shaped, tightly wrapped in black fabric, bulging like a gym bag far too big. No clear shape, but the way Clarissa angled her body to block the view as she passed the camera corner was the move of someone who knew exactly what they were hiding. But what made Leah's skin crawl wasn't the bag. It was Clarissa's eyes. Just before she disappeared from the frame, Clarissa turned and looked straight into the camera, eyes wide, unblinking, like a person saying goodbye, or issuing a challenge. No fear, no rush, just the cold precision of someone who had planned every step. The next clip showed her wheeling the cart across the back lot, exiting through the side gate, usually used for food deliveries. No one stopped her. No student noticed. She left the school as quietly as she had spent years cleaning away every trace of dirt. Leah clenched her fists. I was one step behind. She turned and sprinted back toward the hall where Axel was waiting. And as she reached the corner, she heard it. Scratching. Not angry clawing, not panicked scratching. These were rhythmic, forceful scrapes, like someone knocking from the inside, like a message. I'm here. Axel was reared up against the custodian's door, front paws slamming into the floor, entire body leaning forward, claws scraping the edge of the door over and over. No command, no signal. It was instinct. Final confirmation. Leah approached slowly, heart pounding. She had never seen Axel like this. Not during chases, not during home rescues. There was something behind that door. Something he knew in his very bones. Axel, she whispered. He turned his head to look at her. No bark, no growl, just a tilt, his eyes wide and steady, and in them was something that drowned her in absolute certainty. Someone is behind this door. She reached out and touched it. Cold. Beneath her fingertips, she felt rough paint and faint, fresh scratch marks, Axel's claws. At the base of the door, dust had gathered, but not normal dust. It was dry, metallic-smelling dust, tinged with rust and the acrid scent of air trapped too long. Then Leah froze. A faint breath of cold air slipped out from the door's edge. She crouched down, held her palm near the floor, and felt it. A chill draft, not from an air conditioner, from something beneath. She shot to her feet and pulled out her radio. Response team, emergency code, storage room next to nurse's office, high probability of hidden space, suspected active missing person case. Behind her, Axel sat still, eyes locked on the door. He scratched no more. Just listened, head tilted, like hearing something no one else could. Maybe a faint breath in the dark. Maybe a heart still fighting. And Leah knew in that moment, Axel had seen the truth before anyone else, from that first growl, from the way he lingered at the door. Humans waited for proof. Axel only needed to feel. There was no doubt now. They were deep inside the eye of the storm. And the wall of trust, of silence, had cracked down to its foundations. There was no need for further confirmation. Axel's eyes, the shallow bursts of breath from his nose, the heavy silence pooling around the door, all told Leah one thing. They couldn't wait another second. When the support team arrived, they didn't need a search warrant. The urgency spoke for itself. Leah took the bolt cutters from one of the officers, her grip turning white at the knuckles. The metal padlock snapped after 2 firm clamps, the sound ringing out like the first blow cracking open the buried truth beneath this school. The door swung open. The first thing that hit wasn't the sight, but the smell. An overwhelming stench of bleach, but not fresh. The kind of odor built from years of overuse, like someone had tried again and again to mask something else. A heavier smell, one that outlasted chemicals. The scent of rot, of forgotten time, of darkness held too long. Axel stepped in first, nose close to the floor. Each paw step is slow and deliberate, like he was following a scent trail woven into the fabric of memory, where every molecule told a story. Leah followed, flashlight in hand, sweeping across shelves lined with bottles and supplies, all perfectly arranged. Too perfect, artificially neat. Then Axel stopped. Just beneath the mop shelf, an old wooden rack once painted white, now chipped and peeling with time, Axel's nose brushed lightly against the edge of the tiled floor. Then he growled. It wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening. It carried the sound of discovery, a message that said, here, beneath. Leah crouched, shining her flashlight close to the area under the shelf. The tile looked slightly uneven, and at the center, a faint seam, almost invisible unless seen through the trained eyes and nose of a dog that had been taught to notice what no one else could. She ran her fingers along the groove, and with just a light push, the entire square tile lifted. Beneath it was a metal handle attached to a rusted steel trapdoor. No dust, no cobwebs. It had been opened or used frequently. Leah's heart pounded in her chest. She pointed the flashlight down into the growing void. A blast of cold air rushed upward, damp, thick, and carrying the scent of earth long confined. She pulled on her gloves and gently lifted the hatch. Axel stood right beside her, body tense. He didn't jump down. He didn't wait for a command. He simply stood still, as if he understood that this place wasn't like any other basement he'd entered before. It wasn't a tool closet. It wasn't a storm shelter. It was a place that had swallowed something precious, something that had never been named. Leah shone the light downward. A narrow, creaky wooden staircase led straight into the ground. There was no light below, no sound, just a thick, absolute darkness, as if it had been waiting for someone for years. And now, it knew the door had opened. "Axel," she whispered, her fingers brushing the fur at his neck. He glanced at her, then stepped down. Not with fear, but with quiet determination. Each step landed firmly on the aged wood. Each creak rang out like a somber melody, echoing through the buried memories of someone long forgotten. Leah followed the flashlight, sweeping close to the walls. The beam cut through the black, catching particles of dust floating like mist. The air was dense with the scent of age. And at the bottom of the staircase, there was a small room. No windows, no alternate exits. Just a thin mattress on the concrete floor, a few empty cans, a dry water jug, and a small figure curled into the corner. Leah's heart stopped for a beat. Axel didn't bark. He didn't charge. He walked forward, gently, one step at a time, head lowered, nose close to the ground. Then he made a sound, a soft, almost inaudible whimper, like calling out a name he didn't know. The child didn't move. But as the flashlight beam passed over the small face, matted hair, pale skin, wide but hollow eyes, Leah saw it. He was alive. And it was that gentle whimper from Axel, the first sound the boy had heard in many silent days, that made his body tremble. Just slightly. But enough. He could still feel it. Leah knelt, her voice breaking in her throat. "Evan? Evan Morales? Can you hear me? You're safe now. This is Axel. He came to take you home." The boy didn't answer, but the hand that had been gripping the old student ID slowly loosened. The card slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the cement. Axel, without being told, stepped forward and rested his head gently on the boy's knee. At that moment, no sound filled the room. No crying, no words, only the long-awaited exhale of someone who had been locked away for too long. A breath so faint, yet carrying the force of a storm. Leah wiped away a tear that had fallen down her cheek and raised her radio. "We've found Evan Morales. Alive. Send medical immediately. He needs to be out of here. Now." She glanced at Axel, his gaze fixed on the child. And in the damp darkness of that hidden room, it wasn't a person, a flashlight, or a voice that found the living soul thought to be lost. The flashlight beam cut through the damp air, illuminating a space where life had long stopped breathing. Leah held her breath at that first moment when she saw the small figure curled up in the corner of the basement. A child pressed against the cold wall, arms wrapped tightly around an old-school ID card, its edges curled from sweat and time. The boy didn't blink. He didn't turn. His body was so thin, so fragile, that the elementary school uniform hung loosely over protruding shoulders and bony arms. Only his eyes were wide open, staring blankly into the light, but not welcoming it, as if the light itself was a stranger. Leah called his name. Once, then again. Her voice was low, steady, never pushing. "Evan Morales, I'm Leah, and this is Axel." No response. No movement. Just the frozen stillness of a body that had grown used to darkness and isolation. Leah understood. She had seen children survive car crashes and had held orphans after disasters. But this was something else entirely. This was silence frozen solid. A quiet not born from fear, but from having stopped hoping. Axel still stood a few steps away. He didn't rush forward. Instead, he lowered his body, inhaled softly, then approached slowly, step by step, soundless. No commands, no signals. Just instinct. An instinct born from loyalty and a sense beyond reason. Axel stopped at arm's length from the boy. He didn't reach out. He didn't bark. He simply let out a soft whimper, so faint it was like a whisper from deep underground. No pressure, no demand, just presence. The boy didn't flinch. Axel then lay down completely and gently extended one paw, placing it on Evan's knee. A small gesture, but it was the first touch from another living being in over 3 long months. This time, Evan didn't pull away. He didn't stiffen. There was only the slightest shift, like a current brushing under a frozen lake. His eyes, locked on the flashlight's glow, blinked once. Leah saw it, and she knew. That blink wasn't involuntary. It was survival. The proof that somewhere inside, the boy still held onto a fragment of trust, no matter how deeply buried beneath fear. She stepped closer, kneeling slowly, tilting the flashlight so it didn't shine directly into his face. Her voice softened into something closer to a lullaby. "You're safe now, Evan. No one can hurt you anymore. Someone heard you, even when you couldn't speak. His name is Axel." Axel inched forward, resting his head on the boy's leg. His tail wagged once, not out of excitement, but in quiet confirmation, that he had found the one who needed finding. And then, Evan exhaled, a long, trembling breath, as if held inside for countless sleepless nights. His hands loosened. The ID card slipped to the concrete floor with a faint, echoing sound, like a bell marking the end of captivity. Leah raised her radio, her voice cracking under emotion. "Identity confirmed. Evan Morales, 9 years old. Missing since early August. Alive. Responsive to contact. Request immediate medical assistance. Repeat, urgent medical support required." The basement remained silent, but no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of something miraculous. A soul long thought lost, slowly returning through the gentlest touch of a dog who never gave up. Leah looked at Axel, her eyes brimming with gratitude. No teacher, no staff member, no one in this school had known what was hidden beneath the floor. But Axel did, and he had growled, scratched, waited in silence, until someone finally listened. Evan didn't speak, but he kept his gaze on Axel. No nod, no smile. But when Axel leaned closer, the boy allowed it. And in a world where darkness had ruled too long, allowing a touch was the first step home. Breathing. The simplest act of life can also be the hardest to reclaim when the soul has sunk too deep into darkness. Leah still knelt on the floor, eyes locked on the small figure curled in the basement's corner. In the angled beam of her flashlight, the boy looked like a shadow, faded, silent, as though he no longer belonged to the world above. But in that very moment, he had blinked. A motion so small it could be missed, but to Leah and Axel, it was the sign of life returning. "You're safe now, Evan," Leah whispered, her voice soft and low, like a breath flowing out to meet his. There was no reply, but then, like a breeze brushing through canyon walls after a storm, Evan breathed out. Slowly, long, fragile, but it was a breath, the first since being swallowed by fear. No sound, just a stream of air escaping a locked chest, sending a signal that said, "I'm still here." Leah didn't speak again. She understood that the boy needed space, a silence unbroken by questions or comfort. Sometimes, Quiet presence is the only language a wounded child can trust. Axel stayed by his side, unmoving, not barking, not whining, not clawing. All the alarms had stopped the moment Leah entered. Because Axel knew. His mission was no longer to search, but to protect. He was still as stone. But if you looked closely, you could see his breath rising and falling, slow, steady, as if keeping rhythm for the boy beside him. After a while, Evan's gaze no longer looked panicked. His eyes slowly shifted toward the light, not blinking from reflex, but with purpose. And in that view, he met Axel's eyes, calm, unwavering, and as gentle as a lake after a storm. Evan didn't flinch, didn't recoil. He only stared, as though trying to distinguish between dream and reality. Axel stared back, a silent reply saying, "You don't have to believe yet, just look." No one rushed to interrupt the silence. Not even Leah. Then, slowly, Evan raised his hand. So slowly, it seemed every joint had to be awakened. His fingers paused in the air, hovering just above Axel's head. He didn't touch him. He didn't pull away. That pause, that moment of stillness, was proof of a heart beginning to open, even by the smallest crack. Axel didn't move forward. He merely tilted his head, letting one ear drift into the space just beneath the boy's fingers, a gesture of humility and quiet patience. Another breath escaped Evan's lips, this time steadier, not as shaky, deep enough to show that life had found its rhythm again. From the top of the stairs, a medic's voice called down, "Medical team here. We have a stretcher, oxygen, and trauma support ready." Leah raised a hand. Slowly. The boy just started breathing again. Let's not drown that out with lights and voices. 1 minute passed. Then another. Evan shifted slightly. An unconscious motion, but enough for his shoulder to brush against Axel's warm fur. He didn't pull away. And just like that, the air seemed to lighten, as if the whole basement had started breathing with Evan. Leah stepped closer, keeping her voice soft as a lullaby. "You don't have to speak yet, Evan. You don't have to answer. Just sit here. Let Axel stay beside you as long as you need." Axel lowered his head, gently resting it on Evan's knee. And for the first time, the boy didn't withdraw. He laid his hand on the dog's fur. Not gripping, not petting, just rested it there. And sometimes, just letting your hand stay on something that won't leave you is enough to say, "I want to live." Upstairs, the stairway light softened. One medic sat quietly at a respectful distance, not moving in, while the others waited in silence. No one dared disrupt the fragile miracle unfolding below. Leah lifted her radio, held it close, and spoke softly, her words calm, deliberate, and certain, just like Axel's presence had been. "Confirmed. Evan Morales, 9 years old. Missing since August, alive, responsive to contact, request immediate medical support, repeat, urgent medical response needed now." She lowered the radio and looked at Axel. He didn't move. That dog, the voiceless friend, was the only bridge that brought Evan back to light. Not with shouts, not with heroics, but with patience, steady breath, and a heart that never stopped believing the child is still here. With one breath, Evan had opened the first door leading him back to the world. But to truly cross that threshold, to fully live again in the light, was a long journey, one he could not walk alone. After the rescue, the boy was immediately taken to the local medical center, suffering from dehydration, extreme weight loss, and full-body fatigue. The doctors found no major physical injuries, but they quickly realized it was the invisible wounds that needed the most healing. For the first 2 days in the hospital, Evan didn't say a word. He didn't resist when bandages were changed, nor did he panic among the cold instruments around him. He simply stayed quiet, sitting by the window, eyes staring into the distance as if trying to hear a sound that had long since vanished. Leah visited every day. She brought books and soft toys. Sometimes she just sat and waited. But Evan didn't react until Axel entered the room. No one had to say his name. No one had to explain. The moment the boy saw the dog, He quietly stretched out his hand, the first voluntary movement he'd made in 2 days, and placed his fingers on Axel's warm back, right where the thick, soft fur met his shoulder blade. No gripping, no stroking, just resting there, like someone placing their hand on a memory that had never truly left. Axel didn't climb on the bed or get too close. He lay down beside it, head tilted slightly, eyes calm. With nothing but his presence, he created a safety no sedative could replicate. Evan stayed still for a few minutes. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned his head against his knees, eyes closed, and fell asleep. A real sleep. Deep, peaceful. The first he'd had since being placed in that lightless room beneath the ground. The nurses watched from behind the glass, silently. One whispered, "That dog didn't just save him. He's holding on to what's left of him." Leah didn't respond. She simply placed her hand on Axel's shoulder. Soft, like a thank you too sacred to be spoken aloud. Meanwhile, back in the basement beneath Brookside Elementary, the special investigation team combed through every detail. And it was they who uncovered the truths that left the entire unit silent for a long, long time. On one wall near the ground was a student calendar. Each day was marked off in red ink. Evan had drawn each line himself, counting every day. The day he was found was the 87th square, circled but left unfinished. Next to the calendar were boxes of dry goods, some canned fruit, packets of crackers, and bottled water. Not enough to survive forever, but maintained with calculated effort. What stunned the investigators most was hidden behind the storage rack. A small microphone wired deep into the wall, connected to a line that ran through the hallway near the nurse's office, exactly where Clarissa Bennett had routinely cleaned. That woman hadn't just hidden Evan in the basement. She had been listening, tracking the rhythms of the school for weeks, maybe months, every conversation, every footstep, waiting for the moment someone slipped outside the boundaries of safety. And if not for Axel, if not for that first quiet growl, the unwavering stare at a familiar door, the persistence of clawing at the same spot day after day, then that room might have stayed sealed. And Evan, the boy now asleep in a hospital room, might have become just another name on a missing poster that no one ever took down. Leah held the report in her hands, reading it once before folding it shut. She returned to the hospital room, where afternoon sunlight gently touched the curtain. Axel was still lying there. Evan was still asleep, his hand resting lightly on the dog's back, as if the two of them were sharing the same dream. A dream with no trapdoors, no darkness, only soft light, and the silent presence of a dog who didn't need words to save a soul. It wasn't the sound of ambulance sirens, nor the footsteps of nurses, nor the steady beeping of monitors that told Leah something was shifting. It was the silence. Not the sterile, hollow kind hospitals often hold, but a silence with breath, with rhythm, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Evan sat by the window, pale morning light falling on his shoulder, casting a soft shadow on the white floor tiles. He didn't look out at the busy streets. He didn't listen to the TV buzzing faintly from the next room. He simply sat there, like a door just barely opened, not yet ready to let anyone in. Leah stood at the threshold for a long moment. In her hands was a small box, wrapped in warm brown fabric. She had found it in a tucked-away toy shop in the old quarter. She hadn't chosen it for its price or color. The moment she saw it, she thought of Evan, and the yearning, exhausted way he looked at Axel. Axel walked beside her. He didn't pull on the leash. He didn't rush ahead. He didn't need to be told. He entered Evan's space the same way he had entered the boy's heart. Steadily, patiently, never demanding. Leah stepped to the side of the bed, saying nothing. She sat gently on a nearby chair, opened the box, and placed the small gift on the white bedsheet. A stuffed dog. Not big, not complex, just a soft, plush version of Axel, complete with a tiny canine vest and a stitched badge on its chest. Evan didn't react immediately. His eyes flicked to the box, then slowly to the toy. There was no excitement like other children might show, but there was no aversion either. It was like a flicker of light searching for direction, dim but determined. Leah stayed silent. She knew a single word might shatter the fragile atmosphere that cocooned Evan. She also knew that if a child who had been locked in a basement for nearly 3 months could reach out and touch something, then even the lightest touch was an act of bravery. At last, Evan moved his hand. His small fingers brushed one of the toy's ears, then slowly slid down its back. He didn't grip. He didn't pet. He just let his hand glide, like testing if it would all disappear into mist. Then suddenly, he pulled it closer, hugging it to his chest, pressing his cheek against its soft head, and exhaled a long breath. No one had told him to do that. No one had shown him how. It was the reflex of a child who had longed for warmth, and now, finally, had something safe to hold. Axel lay down beside the bed, eyes on Evan, head tilted slightly. No sound, no extra movement, just the quiet stillness of a living wall, ready to shield the boy from anything else that might come. And then, in the middle of a moment that felt like any other, Evan spoke, so softly, so faintly, like a leaf falling onto water. But Leah heard it. He growled so they could hear me. She turned, heart skipping a beat. Evan didn't look at her. He still had his cheek pressed to the stuffed dog, eyes cast to the floor, hands clutching the toy. Leah couldn't stop the tears. They came too fast. No case file, no statistic, no courtroom testimony about child trauma could equal the power of a first spoken sentence from a child who had survived, about the one creature who had never left his side, the dog who growled at the exact right moment. Axel didn't move, but his tail beat once, a slow, steady rhythm, a signal that a new journey had just begun. Leah leaned down, gently placed her hand on Axel's shoulder, then turned to Evan. "You just said the most important thing, Evan," she whispered. "And you're right. That growl brought us to you. It brought you back from where no one could hear." Evan said nothing else, but he no longer looked down. His gaze met Axel's, deep and steady, without fear, as if finally he understood. He had been lost, but never forgotten. A moment later, Evan reached out and stroked Axel's real head, not the plush one, for the first time, with full trust. Leah quietly opened her notebook and wrote a single line. "Sometimes, to help a child find their voice, all we need to do is sit beside them and let our most loyal dog listen first." Leah would never forget the echo of those words. "He growled so they could hear me," repeating over and over in her mind like a one-line song. And each time it replayed, it stirred something deeper in her chest. From the moment Evan said that everything around him shifted, the hospital room was no longer just a place for physical recovery. It had become sacred, a space where a child's voice had been awakened by the loyalty of a dog. And from that voice, a buried past began to surface. As Evan slowly opened up, another door swung open, this time inside the investigation. The FBI officially stepped in, working with local police to track down Clarissa Bennett, the woman the town had trusted, the one they used to call the kind lady with the rattling cart. But what they discovered afterward made it impossible for anyone involved in the case to breathe easy again. Clarissa had never been a simple janitor. She had worked at no fewer than 5 different schools across the Midwest and East Coast, each time under a new name: Clarice Boyd, Carla Bennington, Charlene B. Randall. Each name came with a fresh employment record, a clean resume, and a vague reason for departure. Complaints, mostly filed by parents or teachers, vanished without a trace. No investigations, no follow-ups, no official record. Every time she moved on, the trail went dark, like nothing had ever happened. The fragmented and outdated interstate HR systems, where background checks were often manual and inconsistent, became the perfect camouflage for her to slip through every crack. And it was Axel's unusual behavior in those first few days at Brookside that shattered the illusion of peace she had built. In a special meeting at the federal office, Detective Ryan Kohler, trained in behavioral crime, placed a thick file on the table, looked up, and spoke with a heavy voice. "My sister went to a school like that." The room went silent. He unfolded an old photo. A row of dimly lit classrooms, yellowed fluorescent lights bouncing off dusted window panes. A woman sweeping the hallway, Clarissa, with shorter hair under another name. "In 2010, my sister was 7. She told me there was a room at school she was afraid to pass, because she always heard noises at night, even after the building was locked. I didn't believe her. It sounded like the usual stories kids make up. Then one day she collapsed in class from low blood sugar. The person who found her wasn't the nurse, wasn't a teacher. It was that janitor." He paused, flipping the page. "A week later, my sister transferred. My mom said it was to give her a better environment. But last year, in a rare conversation about her past, she cried and said one sentence. That door wasn't locked, but no one ever asked why it was always closed." Leah felt her chest tighten. She looked down at Axel, lying beneath the table, ears twitching slightly at Kohler's voice, almost as if he too recognized a truth finally being spoken aloud. Clarissa hadn't acted randomly. Brookside wasn't a coincidence. It was a choice, a next stop in a quiet trail wrapped in normalcy, cloaked in respectability, and layered over something far darker no one dared name. Axel, guided not by human bias but instinct, had growled right where her footprints lingered. That first growl wasn't vague suspicion. It was a declaration. He had smelled something wrong, long before any evidence surfaced. Leah thought back to her first days at Brookside, the times Axel paused in front of the door, Clarissa's sweet deflections, the tension in his body before she saw the new padlock. It had all been there, clear, just not believed, until Axel. And now, as the files came into the light, Leah felt that this wasn't just about criminal justice. It was about rescuing memories that had been smothered, voices that had never spoken, and children like Evan, pulled into darkness while no one was looking. Axel remained still, head between his paws. His tail thumped once as Leah looked down. No one needed to speak to him, because perhaps he already knew. What he did for Evan had opened the way for others too, those who had been forced into silence. When one child speaks, the adults begin to listen. But sometimes, there are children who've been silent for so long that the world starts to believe they're fine. That, Leah realized, was the most painful truth after Evan Morales. Evan had been found, but clearly he wasn't the only one who'd ever been swallowed by the darkness of secrecy. At Brookside, as Evan's story spread, things once overlooked began to take on a new light. A 6th grader named Marcus Delaney, known all year as polite, diligent, and never disruptive, suddenly drew attention from his teachers. Not because he misbehaved, but because he was too quiet. A silence not of calm, but of withdrawal, like a child who'd been touched somewhere no one could see. One Monday morning, as a janitor pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway, Marcus suddenly jolted so hard he dropped his lunchbox. His hands trembled. No one understood what had happened, but his homeroom teacher quietly took note. And 2 days later, when a teacher accidentally dropped a mop, Marcus screamed. That scream, shrill, painful, hoarse, did more than startle the packed hallway of students. It made Leah, standing in the main office at the time, drop her pen. Because within that sound, she heard the exact same pitch Evan had once made during his first nightmare after being rescued. Without hesitation, Leah immediately went to see Marcus, accompanied by the school counselor. The boy was curled in the corner of the room, head down, eyes avoiding contact, his hands twisting the hem of his shirt until it wrinkled. The counselor asked a few questions. There were no answers. He didn't cry. He didn't resist. He simply sat there, as if his body was trying to bury a memory too dark to resurface. Leah didn't push him. Instead, that afternoon, she returned, with Axel. Marcus was still in the same spot. When Leah walked in with Axel, he glanced, then looked away. His body tensed. Leah understood the reaction. But she also knew. Axel never rushed. And that was what made the difference. Axel didn't approach immediately. He lay down a short distance away, close enough but not imposing. No growling, no whining, just calm, steady breathing. Axel didn't need guidance. He could read the lines in a child's posture like the wind reads the shape of a tree. And he knew, for this child, silence was the first invitation. Nearly 20 minutes passed in complete quiet. Then, suddenly, as if something melted inside Marcus's chest, the boy whispered, "I can't sleep. I keep hearing the wheels." Leah responded gently, without trying to pry. "The cartwheels?" Marcus nodded. His eyes were still fixed on the floor. She pushed it down the hall, then stopped. "I thought I was dreaming. But I wasn't. My eyes were open. And I heard a lock. It sounded like a wire chain scraping against a door handle." Leah stayed still. Her heart tightened. "Where were you locked, Marcus?" He didn't answer right away. His hands gradually relaxed. Then his gaze flicked toward Axel. Axel understood. He scooted slightly closer, just one step, then lowered his head, and gently rested his chin on the toe of Marcus's shoe. And then, in a moment that echoed something sacred, Marcus slowly reached out. His fingers touched the soft fur on Axel's head, right where Evan had first placed his hand. The room held its breath, like a thread stretched to its limit. Then Marcus spoke again, clearer this time. "It was a dark place. I didn't know if it was day or night. Sometimes I thought I was flying, then falling. She said even if I screamed, the wind wouldn't hear me." No one in the room could speak. Leah lowered her head, her eyes burning. Axel stayed perfectly still, his gaze steady, like a soldier fulfilling the most sacred duty of his life. The next day, Evan came back to school. Leah told him about Marcus. Only a small part, just enough for him to understand, not enough to hurt him further. Evan nodded. That afternoon, during recess, under the tree behind the library, Evan sat beside Marcus. He brought his little K9 plush, the one with the hand-stitched badge, and placed it between them. "Can you feel the wind?" Evan asked. Marcus looked up. "Yeah. When I was down there, I could hear the wind. But I didn't know if anyone could hear me." He paused for a beat, then added, "But Axel heard. And he growled, instead of waiting for someone to ask." Marcus looked toward Axel, who was lying in the shade, eyes squinting against the sun, but ears still alert, as always. After a moment, Marcus whispered, "Now the wind hears me too." No applause, no cheer, just two children, once buried in darkness, acknowledging each other's existence, and in that alone, the world began to shift. And in the very center of that moment was a dog who said nothing, yet made even the most tightly sealed doors open, through patience, steady breath, and a love that never turned away from human fear. When Marcus began to speak his first words, when memories thought to be buried forever started to resurface from those silent children, Leah knew Evan had become the first key to unlock the door to the truth. But she also understood this. A child could not remain the key to someone else's pain if they were still locked inside. Evan needed to be guided out of the darkness, not just by telling his story, but by feeling safe again, in an environment where no one saw him as a victim, but simply as a child who had the right to walk slowly, speak little, and still be fully loved. So Leah signed him up for a special therapy program designed for children with trauma, animal-assisted therapy. There, instead of being asked to talk, the children were encouraged to draw, to play, or simply to sit beside an animal that made them feel safe. For Evan, Leah had no doubt, Axel was his first and strongest anchor. The first session took place in a quiet garden behind the center, with lush green grass, wildflowers along the path, and the soft thumping of rabbits hopping under the shade. Evan was invited to choose wherever he felt most comfortable, He chose a spot by the fence, near where kittens were sunbathing. Axel sat beside him. No leash, no commands. Just there, as he always was. During that first session, Evan didn't draw. He didn't speak. He only observed. But when a little girl panicked after a bunny lightly scratched her hand, Evan was the first to get up, grab a tissue, and offer it to her. He didn't say a word, but his quiet gaze and decisive gesture made it clear. Evan was relearning how to be present, relearning the feeling of being valuable. In the days that followed, he began sitting closer to the art easel. He didn't pick up a crayon, but he watched the other children's drawings for a long time. When one boy drew a fallen tree, Evan stepped forward, pointed to the roots, and quietly said, "If you draw roots on the other side, it won't fall." The room turned toward him, not because of what he said, but because it was the first time he had spoken about something unrelated to himself. Axel never stayed more than 3 meters from him. He would lie at the foot of the chair, sometimes resting his head on Evan's shoe, as if to wordlessly say, "I'm still here." On rainy days, Evan would sit under the awning to draw, while Axel stayed soaking wet by his side, unmoving. Leah brought a towel to dry him off. She was about to coax him inside when Evan stopped her, gently resting his hand on the dog's head and whispering, "He likes to sit there, to make sure I don't run." Then came a weekend morning, clear skies and golden light falling like honey on the grass. The therapist gave the prompt, "If something ever saved you, draw it." Evan didn't ask for clarification. He didn't hesitate. He walked up, took a sheet of paper, picked a black crayon, and began. He drew an abyss, no rails, no edge. At the bottom was a small boy curled up, his tiny body folded, and arms wrapped around his knees. No face, no mouth, just dark, thick lines, as if he no longer remembered what he once looked like. Then above, where the light began to seep in, he drew a dog, teeth clamped on the boy's collar, pulling him upward, paws planted firmly on the ledge as if using his whole body to hold on to something about to slip away from the world. On the dog's back, he wrote in delicate blue strokes, "Canine, Axel." No one interrupted. No one stepped in. When he put the crayon down, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Evan didn't hold the drawing up to show. He laid it on the table, sat down next to Axel, and bowed his head. After a while, he looked up at Leah, who had been quietly standing in the corner since the beginning, and said, "I don't remember the sound down there, but I remember the growl, and it pulled me back to the light." Axel lifted his head. No bark, no whine, just one slow wag of the tail, like a punctuation mark to the story. Just told. The therapist, eyes brimming with tears, asked to keep the drawing to archive it. Leah agreed. She requested a printed copy to hang in her office, right behind her desk, where she received new cases, where the exhaustion sometimes made her forget why she started. The drawing was framed in warm brown wood. A small brass plaque beneath it read, "Not everyone screams, but everyone deserves to be heard." After that therapy session, when Evan shyly asked Leah to hang the picture of Axel in the police office, not to brag, but "so other grown-ups know this dog heard me when I didn't scream," Leah stood in silence before the frame, hand resting on the desk, and something quietly took root inside her. Not just gratitude, but commitment. If a dog could pull a child from the pit of silence with nothing but a growl, then it was the duty of grown-ups to never let that growl go to waste. And right then, the call from Kansas came. A night shift security guard at the Wichita bus station had reported something strange. A dark-skinned woman in a headscarf, pushing a silver cart, showed up every Tuesday at 10 a.m., never boarded a bus, never met anyone. Just sat still, reading a newspaper back straight, fingers tapping lightly on the handle, like she was keeping time. It didn't take Leah long to recognize those behaviors. She had studied them. 3 months straight at Brookside. And if this was Clarissa, that kind of patience wasn't just habit, it was a sign. She was preparing something or watching to see who might come looking. Leah called the federal task force. A takedown was scheduled for that very day. Leah was cleared to lead. And of course, Axel would come too. That night, in the safe house, Leah checked everything in her tactical bag: gloves, flashlight, rope, and body cam. But the most important item was the black leash with the K9 collar and the vest patch that read, Silent Paw Unit, Axel 04. Axel lay at her feet, eyes half closed, ears alert. The moment she touched the handle of the training bag, he sprang up. Leah looked at him like a fellow officer. No commands, no hand signals. Just the understanding forged through dozens of missions, a language without words. "Tomorrow morning," she whispered. "We close it all." Axel didn't bark. He just stepped forward, sat in front of Leah, and gently rested his head on her knee. His warm brown eyes held a promise that words could never capture. The next morning in Wichita, the task force split into 3 teams to surround the bus station. Leah and Axel sat in an unmarked car, parked a block away from the target. Through binoculars, she saw her. Same posture, paper in hand, cart beside her, back not touching the seat, eyes never looking up. But one thing hadn't changed: the perfect stillness, as if the woman had turned into a shadow that already knew the hour of her reckoning. Leah placed a hand on Axel's back. He glanced at her. Ears perked up. "It's time," she said softly. "Let's go, boy." Axel jumped out of the car, landing lightly. He moved steadily, not fast, not slow, calculating each step on unfamiliar ground. His nose twitched slightly in the wind. He made no sound. Only the tension in the air betrayed what was coming, like a thin wire stretched between waiting and truth. When they were just steps away, Axel froze. A growl rumbled, low, brief, but sharp as a blade slicing silence, just enough for the woman to lift her head. Leah saw it. Those eyes, dark as night, cold and void. But in that moment, something flickered, a glimmer of surrender. She stepped forward, voice firm. "Clarissa Bennett, I'm Officer Leah Monroe. Axel, K9, Special Task Unit, has confirmed a response. You are under federal arrest." The woman didn't resist. She simply looked at Axel and said, barely audible, "I hear that growl even in my sleep, and I know I've got nowhere left to go." Leah cuffed her. No more words were spoken. But as they led her away, Axel stood there, eyes steady, ears still up. Not out of hatred, not out of triumph, but because he knew the door had closed. Not for her, but for the children who once trembled in the darkness she left behind. Back at the car, Leah knelt and gently stroked Axel's collar. "You brought us home again, warrior." Axel just tilted his head, then quietly leaned into her leg. The bus station returned to its quiet routine. But for Leah, Evan, Marcus, and all who had survived in silence, that day was the day a dog's growl didn't just expose the one who ran. It proved something eternal. Truth cannot stay hidden if someone still listens with their whole heart. Clarissa sat motionless under the slanting midday sun, surrounded by the 3-pronged advance of the tactical team. Leah approached from the front, with Axel, alert and steady, trailing each of her steps like a shadow shaped by loyalty. No one spoke, and no one needed to. The silence wrapped around them, denser than tension itself. It carried the collective sense that this final confrontation would not end with just a pair of handcuffs. Leah slowed her breathing and walked evenly, eyes locked on the woman's hands. Axel's ears were standing tall, 2 antennas tuned to the smallest movements in the air. Then he shifted, weight subtly leaning onto his back legs, neck lowering, nose almost to the ground. Leah knew instantly. He'd sensed something wasn't right. "Clarissa Bennett," Leah called, voice steady. Not loud, but each word sharp like a pin dropping into stillness. "We have a warrant for your arrest. You are surrounded. Present your hands. No one wants to use force if you cooperate." Clarissa didn't react. Her head remained bowed, fingers tapping lightly on the edge of her newspaper, just like Leah had seen her do before. But this time, something was different. The rhythm was off, faster, like the final tick of a countdown clock. Leah barely had time to take another step when everything exploded into motion. Clarissa's left hand darted into her oversized coat pocket as if reaching for something hidden deep inside. Leah opened her mouth to shout, but Axel had already launched forward like an arrow loosed from a bow. No bark, no warning growl, just a pure, instinctive leap, so precise it seemed even time stepped aside for that moment of loyal intervention. Axel's bite landed exactly where it had to, on Clarissa's wrist. Not deep enough to cause injury, but firm enough to make her drop what she was holding. She fell to her knees with a soft groan, not from pain, but from defeat. All eyes locked on the object that rolled out from her coat pocket, a small cylindrical canister, twist cap, with a faded label, a veterinary-grade sedative spray, harmless in emergencies, dangerous when abused, capable of knocking out an adult in seconds. When one of the security officers knelt to examine further, he pulled out a folded packet secured with a rubber band, a handwritten list of names, ages, and schools of 8 children. Each line bore a child's name with short notes beside them. Stands near the gate after school, or parents divorced, often picked up late. Every mark, every dash was the signature of someone who had observed, calculated, and prepared to repeat the unthinkable. Leah froze as she held the paper. The breeze caught strands of her hair, but did nothing to cool the heat rising in her chest. Not anger, but a sting behind her ribs, as if she'd just glimpsed the edge of the same abyss where Evan once sat, where Marcus had stood, where others might have fallen, if not for Axel's response. She knelt beside Axel, who still held Clarissa's wrist with practiced control, his gaze fixed on her, steady even as Leah's pulse began to slow. She placed a hand gently on his neck and whispered, "Release, warrior. You've done enough." Axel slowly let go, stepped back, and sat down, tongue lolling in a slow, measured breath. But his eyes never left Clarissa, not a look of chase, but of closure, as if he'd seen the door finally slam shut behind her, sealed by the sound of his growl. Clarissa said nothing. She was taken away in silence. Her overturned pushcart lay beside the bus stop bench, a collapsed prop from a role she would never play again. When the van carrying her drove off, Leah remained still, the list in her hand. Axel sat beside her, not seeking a pat, not needing praise. Because to him, it wasn't about biting the right wrist or catching the suspect. It was knowing that every name on that list, all of them, still had time to live as children. On the ride back, Leah glanced down at Axel, dozing beneath her seat, his head resting lightly on her shoe. And she wondered how many more nights he'd have to growl, how many more times small souls would need him to be seen, heard, and saved. And quietly, she hoped. The fewer the growls needed, the more this world owed thanks to dogs like Axel, who know exactly when and for whom to raise their voice. The patrol car turned onto a narrow stone path leading to the foster home, where Evan was temporarily staying. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy overhead. Leah hadn't spoken since they'd left the Wichita bus station. Axel, with his head resting on the back seat, didn't seem to need any words either. It wasn't a heavy silence, but one that held something unnamed, something that felt like both an ending and the beginning of something deeper, a full-circle moment of waiting, finding, and gratitude. Evan was sitting on the wooden porch, hugging his knees, holding something folded in his palm. He didn't run out when the car arrived, didn't bounce like he usually did. He just watched, quietly, until Axel stepped out first. The way Evan sprang up, not for Leah but for the dog, the way he ran, small and quick, slightly hesitant, then dropped to his knees and opened his arms for Axel to nuzzle into his chest. It was all so real that Leah exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire day. He handed Leah the folded paper. No explanation. No expectant look. Just a gesture, like it was meant to reach whoever needed to keep it. Leah opened it, Her eyes moved across the small, wobbly handwriting, clearly that of a child still learning to form letters, but each word cut straight to the heart. "Dear Axel, I know you didn't bark to scare me. I know you growled so people could hear me. I thought when I was in the basement no one knew. But you did. You growled like you were saying I was still alive. Thank you for not giving up, even when I couldn't scream. I love you." Evan Leah bowed her head, fingers pinching the bridge of her nose, trying to keep her breath steady. But the final line, "Thank you for not giving up, even when I couldn't scream," broke her. It wasn't a loud cry. It wasn't a sob of release. It was the quiet, steady ache of someone who had witnessed pain from the inside, had been silent beside it for too long, and was finally allowed to breathe again. Axel didn't look at Leah. He simply licked Evan's cheek once, then curled up by the boy's feet, as if to say, "We're here now. We're still here." Evan stroked Axel's ear, and in that moment, Leah knew she was witnessing something sacred. Not a miracle in the fairy tale sense, but survival in the truest meaning of the word. That night, Leah brought the letter back to the K9 unit. She didn't keep it in her jacket like a piece of evidence. She held it in her lap the entire drive. And when she entered the command room, she didn't need to explain. She simply placed the letter on the supervisor's desk and said softly, "We don't just train dogs to find drugs or chase suspects. We teach them to hear what humans sometimes forget to listen for, the silence of a lost child." The K9 captain didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he ran a hand along the edge of the paper and nodded. "Oak frame. Hang it where everyone can see it." 3 days later, Evan's letter was laminated, framed, and hung prominently on the white wall at the entrance to the K9 unit. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "A dog doesn't need words, only to know who's waiting to be heard." From that day on, every officer walking into the unit saw that letter first. Some paused, some smiled, some teared up, but all understood. This wasn't just a thank you note, it was a map, a reminder that sometimes, to find someone in the dark, you don't need a flashlight. You need a heart that still knows how to hear the cries that never leave the lips. Axel didn't care about the glass frame. He simply kept lying under Leah's desk, following her into every mission. And every time they passed that wall, his tail gave a little wag. Not bold, not boastful, just a silent nod to a boy who once thought the world had forgotten him. In the quiet K9 unit office, beneath Evan's carefully framed letter, the late afternoon sun spilled across the crooked, heartfelt lines like a silent hymn. Leah stood there for a long time, her hand resting lightly on the oak frame, one thought echoing in her mind. If this is how Evan says thank you, then I will be the one to make sure his voice is truly heard. Just then, a sealed envelope from the district attorney's office was placed on her desk, marking a turning point that could no longer be avoided. Clarissa Bennett had officially pled not guilty. The trial was set to begin in 3 weeks, and Evan Morales, 9 years old, the sole surviving victim, had been summoned as the prosecution's key witness. Leah gripped the notice tightly. She knew that only Evan's voice, not paperwork or forensic reports, could dismantle the lies. But she also knew the cost of bringing a child back to where they were once held. Not geographically, but psychologically. By that time, Evan had stabilized. He was sleeping through the night, eating well, even laughing out loud when Axel hid toys under the pillow and pretended not to know. But when Leah visited him and gently mentioned the word court, the boy went completely still. His face didn't change, but his fingers began twisting his shirt hem, and his lips pressed tightly together as if to stop his heart from falling out. "Do I have to tell it?" Evan asked, his voice barely loud enough for an adult to hear, but just enough for Axel, lying at his feet, to lift his head. Leah nodded gently, without pressure. "You don't have to remember everything. You don't have to tell it all. But whatever you want to say, just make sure it's your truth. You have the right to stay silent. But if you choose to speak, you could help save other kids like you." Evan said nothing. He looked over at Axel. That was all. No question, no refusal. But his eyes spoke a language words couldn't touch. I can't do this alone. The next day, Leah filed a special request with the state court. In it, she included not only the psychologist's reports and medical records of Evan's trauma, but also attached his letter, the very one the entire unit had hung on their wall as a vow. In the section for justification, Leah wrote, "This child was silent for 3 months. He didn't respond to questions, didn't draw, didn't eat, didn't sleep through the night. But beside Axel, the K9 who found him in that basement, he laughed, whispered, and finally wrote, 'Axel is not just a support animal. He is a translator of silence.'" The district attorney's office agreed. So did Evan's doctor. Even the Federal Legal Advisory Board gave their support. But one person still had to decide: the presiding judge. 3 days later, the ruling came in. Special accommodation was granted. For the first time in state history, a K9 would be allowed to accompany a child witness at the stand, not as a symbol of comfort, but as a legally recognized partner. When Leah read the decision aloud to Evan, he asked just one thing: "Will Axel be allowed to sit right next to my chair?" Leah smiled, gently brushing his hair. "Close enough that if you need him, he can rest his head on your leg." For the next week, they practiced every day. Evan was brought into a mock courtroom with a witness chair, a judge's bench, and jury seats. But what steadied him wasn't the space or the echo of the microphone. It was knowing Axel would always be there, in the same spot, looking up at him with eyes that made even the smallest tremor find something to hold on to. On the day of the trial, Evan wore the pale blue shirt Leah had given him. It had a small embroidered paw print near the cuff, a quiet touch to remind him he was never truly alone. In his pocket was a note he'd written the night before, just 3 lines. "I am brave. I am safe. Axel is here." The car carrying all 3, Leah, Evan, Axel, pulled up to the courthouse steps just as the sun rose. Its rays filtered through the car window, laying a soft golden light across Axel's fur. Evan placed his hand on the dog's back, not clutching, just resting it there, as if to send a message in return. "I'm ready. Thank you for waiting long enough for me to speak." Leah looked into the rearview mirror and asked quietly, "You okay?" Evan didn't answer right away. He glanced at the wide courthouse steps, where reporters were already gathering, then nodded, still holding Axel's leash. "I'm scared, but I'm not scared alone." Leah smiled. Not the smile of a police officer achieving victory, but the smile of an adult who had been right to believe that sometimes the first one who helps a child rise doesn't need to speak. They just need to stay long enough until the child chooses to speak for themselves. That morning, the sunlight wasn't warm enough to melt the chill in people's hearts. Outside the Indiana State Courthouse, a long line stood silently. Journalists clutching cameras, parents who had once sent their children to Brookside. But no one spoke loudly. No whispers, no arguments. Everyone understood. Something unprecedented was about to happen. A 9-year-old boy, once held beneath a school, would take the witness stand. And he wouldn't be alone. He would be accompanied by the dog who had pulled him out of the dark. The patrol car arrived without fanfare. Leah stepped out first, her uniform crisp, her eyes focused straight ahead, holding the formal court admission documents. Axel jumped down next, calm and steady, ready, as always, for the moment that mattered. Then came Evan. He stepped out, gripping the leash tightly. In his shirt pocket, the note he had written the night before. "I am brave. I am safe. Axel is here." Inside, the courthouse halls were so quiet that the footsteps of all 3 echoed like distant drums. Axel walked to Evan's left. No commands, no hand signals. He knew the path, knew the task, and more than anything, knew he was anchoring a soul once shattered. The courtroom was large and high-ceilinged. Harsh white lights from above made every detail clear, like a frozen frame. Evan entered, his face pale but his gaze steady. He did not look at Clarissa, seated at the defense table, expression blank, gray hair falling over half her face. He looked straight at the witness stand. Axel walked just behind him, Didn't wag, didn't growl, only gently pressed his head against Evan's leg before lying down by the stand. The judge glanced over his glasses, then nodded solemnly. Let's begin. The prosecutor didn't stand immediately. She placed her hand on the desk and spoke softly, like a breeze. Evan, do you remember the last time you saw light before you were found? Evan tightened his grip on his sleeve, biting his lower lip. The courtroom held its breath. It was when I was still on the playground. Before she called me, he whispered, like an echo from inside. She said I had a nosebleed, needed to go to the nurse's office. And after that? Evan swallowed. He looked at Axel, the dog unmoving, eyes locked on his as if listening to the truth in Evan's soul. Then it was stairs, and the trap door, and dark. The prosecutor paused a moment, then asked gently, Did she say anything? Evan nodded. She said no one would come. She said even if I screamed, it wouldn't matter. No one moved. Leah, seated in the back row, clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. A middle-aged woman silently wept. But Evan wasn't done. I believed her. I stopped screaming, I stopped crying. I lay there like nothing else existed. His voice cracked, but it didn't break. It was soft, low, and rang like a bell into the emptiest places in people's hearts. Then he bowed his head slightly and placed his hand on Axel's back. The dog gently leaned in, pressing his head into Evan's palm like a whisper. But Axel heard me. A breath broke from somewhere in the room. A juror wiped away tears. He didn't growl loud, but it was enough for someone to listen. He didn't need me to scream. He just needed me to still be alive. The prosecutor stepped back. No more questions were needed. What had been spoken was not just testimony. It was truth, undeniable and clear. The defense attorney stepped forward, his face tense, voice forced steady. Evan, maybe you misunderstood. Maybe this was a game that got out of hand. You're just a child. Axel suddenly lifted his head. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply sat up, tall as stone, his eyes cutting through every lie in the room. Evan didn't flinch. He placed a hand on the dog's collar, then looked the lawyer straight in the eye. I am a child, but I know pain. I know fear, and I know who saved me. The attorney fell silent. The jury glanced among themselves. Evan added quietly, as if sealing the dusted-over chapters of his small life. I didn't scream, but Axel heard me. That's the truth. After the testimony that left the courtroom in breathless silence, Evan was escorted to the witness recess room for a short break. Leah followed him into the hallway, with Axel always close behind. Like a shadow that would never separate from him, Evan sat on the long bench, hands clasped, silent. Leah didn't push. She sat beside him, shoulders relaxed, placing her hand gently on Axel's back. The dog tilted his head slightly, eyes tracking Evan, not expressive, but deeply present. And that was enough. Enough for Evan to know he was still being heard, still being held. No thanks required. A court staff member approached quietly. Defense counsel has requested to continue cross-examination. They'll resume in 5 minutes. Evan nodded. No hesitation. No shrinking. Just calmly reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded paper. His note from the night before, written when sleep wouldn't come. He opened it and mouthed the words, I am brave, I am safe. Axel is here. Axel tilted his head and gently nudged his snout against Evan's elbow. The boy touched his head, not gripping, just resting his hand there again, as if that one small gesture was the thread pulling him back from the edge of every nightmare. When court resumed, Evan returned to the stand. Axel followed closely, and this time, as the dog settled beside him, ears pricked and eyes fixed on the defense table, a new tension filled the room. Thin and taut as wire. The defense attorney stepped up, dressed in black, voice low and calm, movements polished. Yet to Leah his eyes always carried a chill, the kind of persuasion that felt hollow at the core. Master Evan, he began, straightening his posture, can you help us understand something? Is it possible that what you remember isn't entirely accurate? Evan didn't respond immediately. He looked down at Axel, lying quietly at his feet, gazing up at him. Evan placed his hand on the dog's head as if grounding himself again. What I mean, the lawyer continued, is that you're very young. Under stress, it's natural to imagine things or to accidentally reshape memories. Axel rose slowly, not with aggression. No growl, no advance, no retreat. He simply stood tall, solid, squared, head lifted, and eyes locked directly onto the man speaking. The court stenographer paused. A juror froze mid-note. Even the attorney faltered for a second, his gaze flicking from the dog to the boy. Evan, calm and steady, stroked Axel's head and said, quietly but with resonance, "I counted the days." The lawyer blinked. Evan didn't let him interrupt. There was an old calendar in the basement. I used a red pen to mark each square. At first, I marked the wrong days. Then I learned to track them. I made 93 marks, one for each day. I remember on day 47, the food ran out. Day 72, the water turned bad. A female reporter near the back lifted her hand to her mouth, eyes shining. Evan clenched his fists slightly, voice still even. On day 93, I heard footsteps. Not hers, not the wheels of her cart. Different footsteps. And then a growl. Quiet, but enough for me to know someone was looking for me. The room held its breath. "It was Axel," Evan said. "You can't imagine a growl like that." Axel remained still. He didn't move. But to anyone who had worked with dogs, understood canines, or seen that boy pulled from the dark by that sound, it was clear. His eyes didn't rage. They didn't ache. They simply confirmed that nothing here is imagined. Everything is real. The defense attorney had nothing left. He stepped back. The judge gave a soft nod and turned to Evan. "Thank you, young man." Axel laid back down, close to Evan's legs. The boy bowed his head and whispered something no one else could hear, except Axel, who responded with a soft lick to his hand. Leah, in the back row, blinked away tears, not just because Evan had protected the truth in the face of an adult trying to deny it, but because of how he did it. No shouting, no theatrics, just quiet certainty, just trust, in a dog who had once growled him back into the light. Everyone in the courtroom rose as Evan stepped down, but he didn't lift his chin to bask in praise. He simply turned to Axel and asked softly, "I did it, didn't I?" Axel didn't have to answer. He tilted his head, gently placing his chin into Evan's palm. And in that moment, Evan understood. You didn't just do it. You didn't let the truth be denied, not this time, not ever again. As Evan stepped down from the witness stand, Axel beside him, watched by every soul in the courtroom, Leah Monroe knew something with absolute clarity. Even before the verdict, justice had already spoken, through a small, steady voice. And the one who made that voice possible wasn't a prosecutor, or a judge, or even an attorney. It was a dog, a canine, with a perfectly timed growl and an unwavering gaze. The trial continued for 3 more days, but it took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. When the judge read the sentence, his voice was composed but couldn't hide its weight. "Clarissa Bennett is hereby sentenced to life in prison, without possibility of parole, without reduction, without reprieve. All appeals are denied at the trial level." Clarissa said nothing. She sat unmoving. Her face was blank, her eyes empty, as if echoing the void she had once locked those children inside. But no one cared what she thought anymore. In the front row, a small boy was sitting beside his dog, his hand resting gently on its collar as if balancing his entire world on the rhythm of its breath. And then, like a dam cracking open, the letters began to arrive. Just days after Clarissa's sentencing, letters from former students, from schools where she had once worked under false names, from families who had always felt that something was wrong, but had never had proof. A 14-year-old boy in Florida wrote, "She told me to keep it secret, but I don't have to anymore." A college student mailed a handwritten letter to the county precinct. "I was once like Evan. But no one listened. Thank you, Axel, for hearing when I couldn't speak. The story swept the nation, not only because evil had been exposed, but because of how the truth emerged, through the courage of a child and the instincts of a loyal dog. 1 month later, on the playground behind Brookside Elementary, where it all began, a memorial was held. The morning sky was overcast, not raining, not bright. Just enough light for people to look one another in the eye and nod quietly. No loudspeakers, no grand speeches. The important things had already been said through action. On the grass, a bronze statue was unveiled. Simple, unadorned. A boy sitting cross-legged, head slightly bowed, hands resting on the back of a dog lying beside him. A familiar pose for anyone who had witnessed Evan and Axel over the past months. The boy's face wasn't sculpted to show emotion, but the small slope of his shoulders carried a quiet gravity. The dog, ears raised, eyes forward, stood watch over the most fragile things in this world: life, truth, and trust. Below the statue, a brass plaque read, "For those who were found, and those who found them." Leah stood still in the crowd. Evan was next to her, wearing a blue jacket with Axel's paw print stitched on the shoulder. He didn't say anything, just held the leash. Axel sat calmly, not looking at the statue, but at Evan, as if only he truly understood. The statue wasn't about honor, it was about remembering. A new principal gave a short speech. Today, we don't just remember what happened. We make a promise, it will not happen again. Every child deserves to be heard, even before they find the words. As the ceremony ended, people stepped forward to place flowers at the statue's base. A first grader, hair in 2 braids, approached Evan and whispered, "I used to be too scared to speak, but now I think, if I had a dog like Axel, maybe I could." Evan bent down and gently replied, "Just choosing to speak, that's already brave. You don't need to be anyone else." Leah stood behind them, eyes misted. She knew justice didn't end in court. It ended here, in words like that, where a once silent child could now pass his courage to another. Axel stayed seated, his gaze calm, ears tuned to the laughter of children playing nearby. No one called him, but he always knew who needed him, and that's something no courtroom verdict could ever put into words. A week had passed since the memorial statue was unveiled, and though life seemed to return to its regular rhythm, Evan, and in Axel's eyes too, still carried one unfinished journey. That morning, when Leah gently asked, "Would you like to go back to Brookside?" Just once, for Gratitude Day. "We don't have to go inside any rooms." Evan didn't respond right away. He looked down at his feet swinging from the chair, then turned quietly toward Axel, who was lying near the window, eyes half closed, but ears perked as if waiting for that exact question. Evan didn't say yes, but when he bent down, gently stroked Axel's back, and gave a small nod, Leah understood. It was time. The weather that morning was mild. Not cold, not warm, just the kind of air that made memories more vivid. Evan wore the blue jacket Leah had given him after the trial, with a small embroidered paw print on the right shoulder. He had picked it himself, folded the collar just so, and when he stepped out to the car, he bowed his head toward Axel and said, "Let's go." That was all. But for Leah, it was everything. Brookside was decorated simply for Gratitude Day. No flashy banners, no loud music, just handwritten notes from students taped to the walls. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not giving up." And in the center of the main hall, "Thank you to the one who barked when we couldn't speak." When Leah, Evan, and Axel entered the assembly hall, no one called their names, no announcements, but every student from grades 1 to 5 fell silent for a brief moment. Then, one by one, they began to rise. No signal, no instruction, just a spontaneous reaction born of genuine emotion. Applause followed, soft at first, then spreading steadily through the room. Teachers stood as well. Some placed hands over their hearts, unable to hide their emotion. Evan walked slowly, He didn't scan the crowd, didn't wave, but he held the leash tightly. And Axel, as always, neither lagged nor led. He walked in perfect step, eyes forward, his gait aligned with Evan's breath. Near the front, where students would give their presentations, Evan paused. He didn't take the stage, didn't need to make a speech. He simply sat in the front row like any other student. Axel sat beside him, resting his head gently on Evan's lap. A familiar habit that no longer surprised anyone, but which still drew a hush from the younger students sitting behind them. A first-grade girl, maybe 6 years old, shyly stepped forward and handed Evan a folded paper. He opened it and read the scrawled message. "I'm scared, but I will speak, because you and the dog can hear." Evan smiled. He said nothing, but gently tugged the girl to sit beside him. He pressed his hand against Axel's head and whispered something. Leah couldn't hear the words, but she saw Axel exhale. A long, slow breath like a sigh of comfort. Maybe Evan had said, "We did it, and now it's time to stay, not in the dark, but in the light." The ceremony continued with words of gratitude from the new principal, from the school counselor, and finally from the art teacher, the one who had started a free drawing class to help students express their emotions. But no one forgot the way Evan and Axel sat silently, saying nothing at all, yet becoming the clearest voice in the entire morning. When the program ended, a teacher approached Evan quietly and asked, "If you'd like, you could return to school here. I'll make the arrangements." Evan shook his head gently, not out of fear, but with calm certainty. "I want to start somewhere new, but I want to come back here, to remind people, to keep listening." Leah turned away, wiping a quiet tear. She knew Evan wasn't just recovering. He was healing others, especially the ones who had stayed silent when they should have spoken. Axel remained still, his eyes thoughtful, ears flicking at the sound of departing students. A child ran past, paused, bent down, and kissed the top of Axel's head before dashing off again. Axel didn't react, except for a subtle stretch forward, as if he understood, "We've planted another seed in someone's courage that doesn't need words." That morning had seemed to end in perfect peace. After the Gratitude Day ceremony, the school hosted a small gathering in the courtyard, simple but warm, with homemade cookies, cups of juice, and hand-painted tablecloths in bright colors. Evan sat on a stone bench near the rear garden, breaking off pieces of cookie to share with Axel, a quiet smile at the corner of his lips. No more sniffles, no awkward questions. People let him be, because everyone understood that some resurrections needed silence to take root. Axel lay at his feet, as calm as ever, seemingly enjoying the moment as a well-earned reward. But peace never asked permission to be broken. In a split second, Axel's body tensed. No bark, no scanning. He just stood up, ears erect, eyes locked toward the hallway behind the gym. A storage area, long scheduled for renovation but still temporarily padlocked. Leah, just a few meters away chatting with a teacher, noticed immediately. She stood up, her eyes following Axel's gaze. Then the growl. Not loud, not prolonged, but that sound, that deep rumble from the chest of a trained K9, was the same growl that had once cut through a basement's silence. A growl meant to alert. A growl meant to lead others to what they couldn't see on their own. Axel took off. Across the grass, turning left toward the narrow corridor beside the equipment room, the one assumed locked that morning. Evan shot to his feet in alarm. Leah, already moving, pulled her radio and signaled campus security while following close behind. Axel reached the old metal door. He didn't charge. He stopped, nose to the ground, one deep sniff. Then he stepped back and sat, facing the door, guarding something. No barking, no scratching, just waiting. Leah approached, gently placed a hand on the door handle, and opened it just enough to let in a shaft of light. And there, behind a stack of folded chairs, was a small shape, curled in fear, a girl, no older than 7. Trembling, hair tangled, wide eyes full of terror. Leah dropped into a crouch, her voice soft and low. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl trembled. "Maya." Just then, a janitor appeared from the rear hallway. A man recently hired, holding a damp cloth. Leah instantly raised a hand. "Stay where you are." He froze, then dropped the cloth and raised his hands. But his eyes shifted. Axel didn't wait. He stepped in front of Leah. Solid. His back arched, lips pulled back, not attacking, not touching, but making a single point clear. "You won't take another step." Within minutes, school security and local police arrived. Leah motioned to two officers, who detained the janitor, Dale Corman. Hidden inside his cleaning cart, behind cloth liners, they found a small backpack. Inside zip ties, lollipops, a disposable camera, and a printed list of student names, including Maya Johnson. When Maya was carried outside, she said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. Only when she passed by Axel did she reach out and gently touch the top of his head, as if she had known him for a very long time. A simple gesture, but one that Leah couldn't witness without emotion rising to the surface. Evan stood across the courtyard, hands clenched tightly around Axel's leash, his face pale. Leah walked over to him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's safe now," she said softly. He asked in a quiet voice, "Did he know from the beginning?" Leah looked at Axel, still standing, eyes fixed on the storage building, and nodded. "He always knows, Evan. We just need the right moment to understand it." Evan leaned down and wrapped his arms around Axel's neck, lips pressed tight, but his eyes filled with tears. "You saved someone again," he whispered. "I wasn't imagining it. I never imagined it. You always knew." Axel lifted his head to meet Evan's eyes, then leaned in, pressing close to the boy's chest. No more words were needed. As Leah once said, "Some heroes don't need language. They only need 4 legs, a loyal heart, and the instinct to never turn away from what needs saving." Right after the rescue of little Maya, a new wave of reckoning rippled through the education community and state law enforcement. No one doubted anymore that danger in schools could come from the least expected places, and that sometimes a single low growl from a K9 could be enough to stop the tragedy. Axel's story made the front pages again. But this time, the spotlight didn't shine only on him. It illuminated a truth that could no longer be ignored. Listening to silent signals is sometimes the only way to keep those who don't know how to call for help. The following week, Leah Monroe received a call from the Indiana State Office of School Security. The woman on the line was both formal and sincere. "We'd like you to join the child-focused special task force, not just for your skill, but because you, and Axel, did something no one else has. You saw what adults usually overlook." Leah paused. She glanced over at Axel. Resting beside Evan, his head on the boy's lap like a silent promise never to leave. And she knew she couldn't say no. But instead of simply replying, "I accept," she asked, "Can I bring one more person? Someone who has something to say, and needs to be heard?" There was no hesitation on the other end. "You mean Evan, right?" "Of course. We'd be honored." The new initiative launched quickly under the name Silent Paw Project. Leah, Evan, and Axel became the core team, visiting elementary schools, middle schools, and trauma recovery centers. But not everywhere needed speeches or slideshow presentations. Sometimes Axel just walking calmly through a hallway was enough to make a child burst into tears. Because, for the first time, someone understood. Evan didn't always say much. But when he did, everyone listened. At a session at Riverview Elementary, after a student shared that he always felt a tightness in his chest whenever adults yelled, Evan stepped forward, holding Axel's leash. His voice was soft, but it filled the entire room. "When I was trapped, I didn't know who to call. I had no voice, no phone, but I had my breath. And Axel heard that breath. He didn't need me to speak. He just needed me to still be there." Then Evan turned to Axel and said something only the two of them truly understood. "When I couldn't speak, you spoke for me." Someone in the audience quietly wept. A young teacher hugged a student beside her, wordless. Evan's words didn't aim to shock. They reached into the still corners of people's hearts, where their silence had once lived. Leah stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes following Evan and Axel like an older sister watching her younger brother grow into his best self. Not through victory, but through courage. The simple kind. To return, to tell the story, and to turn fear into a light for others. On this new journey, there were days when Evan didn't want to talk. Leah never forced him. Axel never demanded bravery. But when Axel entered a room and sat quietly beside Evan, silence no longer felt scary. At a center for abandoned children, an 8-year-old girl hugged Evan tightly and whispered, "Aren't you scared when you talk about the sad stuff?" Evan replied without hesitation, "I'm scared, but I have someone beside me, and you will too." Then he called Axel. The dog came forward, sat in front of the girl, and looked up. No commands, no tricks, just presence. She reached out and gently stroked his head, and smiled for the first time that day. At moments like that, Evan became calmer. He no longer dreamt of the basement. Instead, some nights he dreamed of standing with Axel in front of a locked door, and this time he was the one who opened it. Axel hadn't changed, but in every silent paw step he left in school hallways, hundreds of unspoken growls seemed to travel, like signals sent ahead, and in the eyes of children who had once been voiceless, now quietly watching Axel's every move, was something like a whisper. "Thank you for hearing me before I even knew how to speak." After all the talks, the travels, and the quiet glances from children learning how to rise from silence, Evan sat down at the small wooden desk in the bright room he called My Corner and began to write. No one had asked him to. Not a teacher, not a therapist, not Leah, not the media. It was just that, this morning, waking from a dream that, for once, wasn't a nightmare. Evan knew. It was time to say something. Not for the world, but for himself. For the boy he used to be. The one curled up in the dark. Too afraid to believe that even breathing could be heard. He took a blank sheet of paper. Chose his light blue ink pen. The color Axel seemed to like most, since he always sniffed it a little longer. And with handwriting still tilted and wobbly, Evan wrote, line by line, no rush, no fear. "To me, when you were still trapped in that basement, I know you were scared. I know you thought no one was coming. But I'm writing this letter to tell you, a dog was looking for you. You couldn't see him, but he smelled your fear. He felt your silence. He didn't need light to know you were there. So don't let go. Don't breathe too quietly. You might only have one breath left, but that's enough. He's coming, and he won't stop. I know because he did it, and you're me now. I'm alive. I'm writing. I'm standing in the light. Because one day, a growl echoed, soft but unwavering. And the world listened. Evan set the pen down. He didn't wipe the tears from his face. He let them fall, not because he was hurting, but because he had just written the most important thing since he'd left that basement. A letter not sent through the mail, but into the deepest part of memory, where a little boy had once sat holding tight to his student ID, believing it might be the last thing he'd ever own. Leah stood quietly in the doorway, saying nothing. She saw the letter, saw the small hand brushing under his nose, then looked beneath the desk, where Axel lay with his head resting on his paws, eyes closed but not asleep. As always, he was there, not interfering, not asking, just present, like a warmth that breathes, like a heart that never turns away. Evan folded the letter and slipped it between 2 blank pages in his notebook, as if sealing a memory not to forget, but to remember. Then he looked up and spoke. "I'll keep it for the other kids," he said to Leah. "If anyone ever feels the way I used to, I want them to know silence is also a signal, and someone will hear it." Leah nodded, her throat tightening. "And what if they can't name what they're afraid of?" she asked. Evan didn't answer right away. He leaned down, stroked Axel's back gently, and whispered, "Then a dog will growl for them." And that was enough. Later that day, on the Silent Paw Project's website, Leah posted a short video, just a few seconds long. It was nothing but a shot of Axel looking directly into the camera. Still, deep, steady. The caption beneath it was simple. Someone out there needs to be found, and sometimes the only thing you need to do is listen for the growl no one else can hear. Behind every visit, behind every student gaze that no longer darted away, behind every scar stitched together with patience, there stood a dog who never turned from the dark. Axel never knew he was a symbol. He just did what he always did, sensed what others missed, and stood guard for those who hadn't yet discovered they had a voice. That growl, it never disappeared. It's just waiting for the next time, somewhere, in some quiet corner, where a child is waiting for someone to notice they're still breathing. And now, thanks to Axel, more than one person knows how to listen. Maybe the most powerful part of this story isn't just how Axel saved Evan, but how that dog taught all of us to listen with our hearts, even when no words are spoken. Because sometimes a single, quiet growl can save a life. And you? If you've ever seen a look, a gesture, or a silence and wondered, is someone waiting to be found? What would you do? If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, so we can continue to tell human, heartfelt stories like Evan and Axel's. Thank you for listening.